You are listening to Hit Play, Not Pause, a feisty menopause podcast for active, performance-minded women. I am your host, Celine Yeager. Each week, I bring you advice from athletes, scientists, researchers, and other experts to help you feel and perform your best, no matter what your hormones are doing. This show is a production of Live Feisty Media. Hello, strong, feisty women. So there's something that I see come up in our community a lot. A woman, maybe in her early 40s, will start experiencing symptoms. Often it's waking up at 2:30 in the morning, wide awake, maybe with feelings of impending doom or panic, night after night out of nowhere. Or maybe she suddenly can't remember one of her coworkers' names despite seeing her every single day for 7 years. She's just not herself. And because of shows like this one and all the media attention to menopause, she recognizes this could be a sign of perimenopause. So she goes to her doctor, and one of the first questions is, are you still getting regular periods? If she says yes, very often any notion of perimenopause is quickly swept out the door. And that's what happened with this week's guest, Nina Coslov, founder of Women Living Better. And she has both personal and research experience in exactly this. In fact, she conducted an entire study on this topic that was published in the journal Menopause. And that study found that women in what is known as the late reproductive stage, when you still have a regular cycle, which may have nearly imperceptible changes to it, can experience symptoms very similar to what we associate with the menopause transition or even postmenopause. That's a problem because one, we as women ourselves aren't often expecting symptoms to show up that early. Two, our doctors aren't either. They're not expecting symptoms to show up often until about 50. And three, we're not getting the care we need that could set us up for better well-being and health in midlife. So I had Nina on the show to talk about her experience, her research, and the organization she started to make things better. I encourage you to check out her research and give Women Living Better a follow. I will put a link to her studies, her website, and Instagram in the show notes to make that all super easy. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. I think it's a really, really important one. Okay, before we get to it, as always, check us out on Instagram and Facebook at Feisty Menopause. Come on in and join our private Hit Play Not Pause Facebook group where you can have active menopausal discussions with 30,000 women just like you. And keep your eyes peeled for our new course, Navigate Menopause, coming soon. I will put a link to that in the show notes as well. Quickly, before we get to it, thanks Previnex for your longtime support and keeping our team healthy over the holidays and into the new year. Our staff swears by their Immune Health Plus product to keep colds, flus, wintertime sickness at bay. So thanks Previnex for your long time and continued support. We really appreciate you. All right, enough of me. Let's have a few words about our awesome sponsors and get on with the show. Okay. Well, Nina, I am so glad to have this conversation with you. We met not that long ago at the I want to call it the North American Menopause Society conference, but it's not the Menopause Society annual meeting. You know, they're gonna need a new, not a new name, they can't do that, but
An
we're so
acronym.
used to saying NAMS.
I know.
And there's no interesting, like just off the tongue acronym for the
Right.
Menopause Society.
Right. Well, TMS, it's just too close to PMS and
Right. It's just not,
yeah,
it's not
yeah.
working. But anyway, we met there and I'm glad to have you. I'm glad to have you here. So I was really looking forward to this conversation because I think it's going to shine light on a lot of issues that bubble up in my communities that people just are so confused about and feel like they're alone about. So I'm very excited to have this conversation. But before we dive in, I want a little bit more on you because like how you got to Women Living Better. So I read an interview with you on healthywomen.gov and the lead paragraph says, in her early 40s, Nina Coslov started experiencing symptoms of perimenopause, but she was still having regular menstrual periods when she couldn't get answers for her healthcare providers. She co-founded Women Living Better, an organization dedicated to improving women's understanding of the path to menopause through research and education. So, Nina, lots of women have these experiences and then they just don't turn around and go, I'm going to start a not-for-profit site. So like, can you fill me in on the more of the backstory there?
Yes. So let me tease that apart. I've always had an interest in science and medicine. Some of my medical, doctor friends say, just go to med school already. So I've always liked research. I worked in biotech for a while and kind of knew my way around finding the research and PubMed and so forth. And
Mhm.
so when sort of new things, experiences, aka symptoms, started popping up for me, I turned to the research, and there was very, very little um, about anything happening while periods were still regular, but there was a very little. And over the course of my own experience, and then connecting with a good friend of mine, she was having a sort of a similar experience in terms of she was still getting regular periods, but different set of symptoms. And I said to her, I think there's something here. And I just bugged her until she just said, okay, let's delve in and see what there is. And once we learned what we had learned on our own behalf, it felt, inevitable to me not to share that with other women.
Mm.
There wasn't much and there needs to be a lot more, but there was enough that I didn't know that started honestly making me just feel better and validated, and it normalized my experience. And that's really been the goal of Women Living Better the whole time. And I think there's just so much power in that, in sort of normalizing what we do know and understanding it better. Because as I said, that's really was made me feel so much better. So it started with the website. Um, just putting up what we had learned and trying to figure out a way to do that that was digestible and easy to read. I get all kinds of feedback on the site in terms of, some of my friends say it's too much like reading, a medical book. Put up more pictures, simplify more, but it's not simple. And so I really try to strike the balance between making it, easy to understand, but it's not the very, very quick. So that's kind of how this, out of personal experience, and then just feeling compelled and to share it with others.
What were you experiencing?
So my first thing was sleep, sleep disruption to be specific. And, I remember it as waking up, somewhere between like 2:08 and 2:13. Like it was like crazily precise. I mean, over and over and over. And then honestly, I was getting so stressed and anxious about my sleep that I am sure I made it worse, because I kept thinking something is really wrong with me. This is out of nowhere. I had always been a really good sleeper, even through like kids that were terrible sleepers. I could deal with them and get back to bed. And I was awake for really long periods of time with also um like a revving energy, like, and we can get into sort of the research that we've done later. But again, other women have described it better than I could. Kind of waking with anxiety or kind of panic, or there is some kind of, the scientific word is arousal, which is, there's different. It wasn't that kind of arousal, but just I just felt revved up. Um, and so a lot of times I would get up and do stuff because just lying there didn't working. So that was the first thing. And then I'd say, and I don't know if these two things were related or not, but like 6 months or so later, I started just feeling, again, I would describe it as a fragility or feeling less able to cope with things.
Mm.
Like that had never been my thing. I took on a lot, and I was worrying about stuff I hadn't worried about. So I call it sort of like a fragility, or less able to cope in our research. And I know it gets put in the big anxiety bucket, but I think that it is different. I think the perimenopausal experience is actually different and more subtle, and that's also something that I hope to tease out in further research.
And what were your healthcare providers' reactions to this?
So I went to my primary care doctor, and then I happened to have an OBGYN appointment, and they were exactly the same when I described this and said, could this be hormonal? The first question they asked me was, are you getting a regular period? I said I was. And then they said, well, then that's not what this is. And they offered me what they had. Well, my primary care doctor offered me what she had in her toolkit. I do think providers are doing their best by women, and just the research isn't there. They don't know either. And so I'm really, really careful not to throw our healthcare providers, under the bus here, because I now realize how little is known about this phase of life. And I should say, like, I'm talking about perimenopause, and specifically, I am trying to shine much more attention on the late reproductive stage, which we'll
Yeah,
get to
we'll
in a
get to
minute. But
that.
yeah, which is the very earliest part. So I believe that perimenopause actually begins before regular, you start experiencing noticeably irregular cycles. Now, what I will say is, I had stopped tracking my cycles and my periods at that point, because I wasn't trying to get pregnant. And had I been tracking, and I now have a lot of this data up on the website, I would have seen a subtle change in my
Mm.
cycle length and flow and amount of flow. And that is something, again, we'll get to it. I'm jumping ahead, but that women can do to know themselves that change is afoot. So I didn't give them that information. I just merely said, yes, I'm still getting a regular period. And I was getting a monthly period, but things were changing for me. I didn't know it. I didn't have the data to confirm that for myself.
And then did you eventually find care?
Uh, I found I found it and found women living better. Honestly, this has made, I think, two things. One, I think hearing from so many other women and doing the research, the normalization of it was just huge for me. I think I started focusing more on, the things that are so annoying, but self-care, like sleeping, better sleep. And I started drinking less, and I think those things have really helped. I mean, right, we're all living dynamic experiences, N of one. And so I can't put to my finger on exactly what worked and changed, but knowledge, a whole bunch of kind of lifestyle slash behavioral self-care, whatever you want to call it. And I also have this hunch. I have not been able to research this on my very meager research budget, but I think there's an initial perturbation of the system when our hormones start not to when they start to fluctuate, that it's like like kind of a jolt to the system, because everything seemed, and I've talked to others too, just seemed much more difficult, or just much more amplified early on there. And this was my early 40s. And then again, whether it's just naturally settles down as our bodies work to get back to homeostasis if you support your body, or these other things I was started doing, or the knowledge I got kind of less anxious about my anxious and sleep things. I don't know. I can't say. But I actually have nothing like a healthcare provider gave me made a change. It's all been sort of self-hacking. I don't know what the word is. Just things I've done and learned. And it just also might be time. Maybe I've just been better focused on supporting my body through this transition.
So let's dig into the research that you did do. That you did the study on the symptoms experienced during that late reproductive stage and the menopause transition. And I do think that this is really, really important, because I hear, there's a woman I work with who I think she's definitely, like, clinically could be defined as perimenopausal, but maybe late reproductive stage. And that's where the when, like you, when you go to the doctor and the doctor's like, oh, do you still have your period? And you say yes, unless there's some dramatic change, but you may not even notice.
Right.
They're not going to put you in that menopause transition yet. So talk about what you found, like lay the groundwork between, like, what is late reproductive stage and what's the menopause transition, and what were you looking for and what did you find?
Yep. Okay, so let's start with those definitions. So the late reproductive stage is when you're getting a monthly period, but you notice subtle changes either to your cycle length, so that's the amount of time between day one of one bleed or flow and day one of the next, right? That's 28 days, 35 days, right? So subtle changes there, subtle changes to the amount of flow, so heavier or lighter flow, and the days of flow. So changes to any of those things. can put you in the late reproductive stage. You don't officially enter the menopause transition until you have the technical definition is persistent 7-day changes between consecutive cycles. So that would be a cycle of 35 followed by one of 28. And if you really drill down, it's you need to have 2 of those in 10 months to officially enter the menopause transition. So then you're in the early menopause transition. And then to get in the late menopause transition, that's 60 days without a period.
Wow.
That makes is are you with me?
I'm with you, but like what I'm thinking though, and we can talk about this because you use the straw
Yes,
criteria, which is stages of reproductive aging workshop, and
right.
it's a list of criteria often used in research. One of the issues I have always had with straw, and I believe your study finds, is that it weighs like the hormone variations so heavily, and it doesn't, and the cycle variations, but it doesn't correspond with women's lived experiences.
Absolutely.
They say that symptoms, quote, symptoms, most notably vasomotor symptoms, are likely to occur late menopause transition. True, and hot flashes may be the hallmark, but they're far from the only one or even the most
Absolutely.
disruptive
Yeah.
symptom.
So 100%. I mean, that is truthfully where this project started because I was interviewing one of my research collaborators at her house just to put something up on not to put a series of videos up on the Women Living Better site about various symptoms. And I brought straw with me and I said, Dr. Richardson, why is there nothing except vasomotor symptoms in the clinical description here? Don't we know more than that? And she said, that's a good question. And then she contacted our other research collaborator. And then that's really how I moved from the education part to the research part. So exactly to your point. Um, so those definitions I gave were very, very technical, but everybody, women, clinicians alike, just simplify it to regular and irregular periods.
Yeah.
But if we're going to hone in on the late reproductive stage, I think there's some real power for women in tracking to see if there are changes in cycle length, flow, or amount of flow, because that sort of is a signal that things are changing, and so maybe these things I'm experiencing like are really related to something,
Right.
even if healthcare provider can't do that for you. So um, what we found, I should say, we did an English version and a Spanish version. We had about 2,400 people start the English version, and then in various analyses we created sort of people that were for inclusion that were eligible, that had no kind of hormonal changes, to like they weren't on a birth control pill, they weren't taking estrogen, progesterone. So we wanted to see kind of the natural course of what folks in the late reproductive stage versus the menopause transition were experiencing. And we asked about 61 symptoms, and we asked about a whole bunch of other things. Our findings were definitely, for some people in the late reproductive stage, there are symptoms. And then interestingly, the symptom experience was more similar than different to those in the late reproductive stage. Now, I will say, our population was not necessarily representative of the whole population, right? These people who took our survey and spent 16 or 18 minutes were motivated to, and
Yeah.
they were probably but there are some people for whom in the late reproductive stage there's definitely symptomatology, and we established that, and then that it wasn't that different from those in the menopause transition. So that was one thing, that symptoms exist in the late reproductive stage, that they're not that different from what people experience in the menopause transition. We established that there are way more symptoms than hot flashes and vaginal dryness, the brain fog symptoms and the mood symptoms. We asked about the frequency of experiencing them. We asked about the bother. And so we had a lot of data. And then the other really important thing was we asked a question: at what age did you assume symptoms associated with menopause would begin? And 59% of people said 59% of people said age 50 or later, right? And that's really huge, right? It's the late reproductive stages, and we, I think the average age, and this I'd have to pull the paper up. I should say that all of this data, I have spent a lot of time putting the whole paper and all of this data up on the Women Living Better site because I really did this. This was we've published other papers, but I almost started this whole project just to be able to share this data with women so that they could go and see these things and say, wow, there are other people experiencing them. Again, just to normalize this. And what I hadn't thought of was that these papers would be behind a paywall. And
Mm.
so I have to do 2 GoFundMe campaigns. And so this one now is totally free. Anybody can see it, they can download it. It's all on the site. I've tried to make it kind of user friendly. So I encourage people who think that they're in the late reproductive stage and maybe experiencing things to just go see what, I think in that analysis, there were 1,500 total, I think 945 people in the late reproductive stage and 580 or so in the menopause transition. So it's out there to check out. And so, yeah, the symptom experience is broader than we think, and we expect it later, and it happens sooner. I'd say those are our very high level takeaways from that piece of research.
Do you recall what the most common crossover symptoms were into the late reproductive stage?
Um, what do you so in
Like
I think
that
brain.
overlapped with the menopause
Oh
transition.
yeah, so forgetfulness was, I think, the uh, top reported symptom of both. Um, I
Interesting.
think interestingly, in the late reproductive stage, hot flashes didn't make the top 10. It does once you get to the late reproductive stage.
You mean
Uh,
late men?
I'm sorry, menopause transition. Sorry,
Yeah.
yeah. And the only one that declined was breast tenderness, which is very consistent with other research. So that again is something that I think for a lot of people, breast tenderness is common, like early, like in our 20s, and then it kind of goes away. And then when the hormones start to fluctuate again, it comes back premenstrually for people. So that's just another, another interesting one. Um, the sleep and mood, and the brain fog symptoms of
Mm.
forgetfulness, more difficulty concentrating, um, I think we're pretty close to the top. I pulled these up so that I could let's see, here I have it. Let's see. I'm more forgetful, names and where I put things. I'm irritable was up
Mm.
there. Short-tempered, grumpy, impatient. I should say we also used women. Part of one of the features on Women Living Better is there's all these ways to kind of share experience into the site. And so I really used women's words to um, craft a lot of these questions. I've sore breasts is up there. I have a harder time concentrating. I'm less interested in sexual activities, new fatigue. I have feelings of anxiety, more nervous, drier skin, awake at night and awake for an hour or more. I feel easily overwhelmed, less able to cope. So those were some of the top.
So I think this dovetails really nicely into like another study you did earlier this year on seeking healthcare for perimenopausal women.
Mm-hmm.
Like what happens is, there may be women who go to your site, late reproductive, they see, wow, I have these symptoms that they look just like perimenopause, or maybe they're starting to enter into perimenopause and they don't know it because they haven't clocked all their cycles. But what did you find on the study of women seeking care in perimenopause?
So I'm just going to set up how we found that. That paper, I think it's interesting for women to read, but it's almost more targeted at helping healthcare providers um, uh, better support their patients seeking healthcare. So a little bit different audience there. But as part of the survey, we asked of all the symptoms you've endorsed, what's your most bothersome? And then we said, did you seek healthcare for that most bothersome symptom? And if so, how did it go? And it was an open text box. And so this piece of analysis is something called qualitative analysis or content analysis, where we actually coded like 983 responses. And you code them, and each of the three of us kind of took a different chunk and we coded them and then proposed um, kind of themes, and then you kind of roll the themes up. And so basically what we found were there were like 5 themes associated with, we call them satisfied or satisfaction in visits. That's when an experience is validated, the patient feels heard and supported, the provider has normalized or acknowledged that their symptoms are linked to perimenopause. Another one of the themes was matching explanatory models. So, you come in and you say, here's what I think is going on for me. And if it matches what your healthcare provider, that's that's a positive outcome. Supported by a team. That was a satisfying experience, shared decision making, and feeling like the symptom was addressed. And then, not surprisingly, for many of those, the converse, the four themes associated with dissatisfaction were invalidating experiences. So being dismissed for being too young, you're still getting regular period, not acknowledging that this is related to perimenopause, or being told like it's just how it is. And this paper too, we did a GoFundMe, and so this is totally public and available. And we did use there's a table in there where we actually put all, not all, but we illustrated each of these themes with specific quotes, and so that's the quote data in
Hmm.
that study. Other themes associated with dissatisfaction: a mismatch in the expectations between the patient and the provider. Like the patient seeks root cause or the logic of the therapy being offered, and the provider is just sort of saying, here, take this, it works. And, a big one that came up there a lot was women who had hot flashes being offered an antidepressant and saying like, I'm not depressed. Why are you giving, and they leave and say, oh, they think I'm depressed, right? And they may actually not think they're depressed. There is some data to suggest that SSRIs are pretty close to, hormone therapy. The Miss Flash studies showed that. And I think, again, that's just not widely known, and our providers don't have a lot of time to explain it, but it's really, really important to explain to a perimenopausal woman. Uh, Barriers to treatment, sometimes a provider would say you need to go have this meet with this other person, and the patient feels like they're being given, like, not the runaround, but no, I just, can't you just help me? Or just generally, a lot of patients just said it didn't help, whatever they offered didn't help, or they didn't want to help, or they shrugged, or dismissal, those types of things. So that was that was that piece of research. um I think the kind of takeaways there for women are, going in with like a very specific thing. I think our providers can help us best, but it's very difficult because perimenopause and all of these new symptoms don't really lend to, you're just more like, what is going on with me? And again, I think sometimes there are so many providers that just, they can't help. They don't know enough to be able to support us through this transition. And that's, I think, just the way things are right now. It's hard to find, for many people, it's hard to find a provider that's knowledgeable in this space.
So where do we go from here? How do we pull this all together to make this experience better for women?
Yeah.
Not only so women understand what they may be experiencing, but like get help,
Yeah. No, I mean, I spend a lot of time thinking about that. And, as we're seeing, there are telehealth providers coming into the space trying to fill that care gap when women actually need care. The piece that I'm trying to do is to provide the education to normalize and to just help us understand what do we know about this, what's known about this phase of life, and what is the realm of things that can occur, and why are those occurring, and what are the things that you can do outside of healthcare. So that's the part that I'm focusing on. And I think at least we're having some attention. There's more attention lately, and I think most of it is good. I mean, I think, as there are a lot of people jumping in, and I think, on behalf of perimenopausal women, I'm very protective, and I think they're very vulnerable, and I think there's some people taking real advantage of that. And so I think, the information you get that doesn't have any product or program tied to it, the better. Um so I'm hopeful that some of these telehealth, I think the limiting factor is the providers that are trained. But look, the Menopause Society is working to train up more people. I mean, by looking at the size of the people, the number of people at that meeting, they said it was their biggest meeting yet. I'm hopeful about that. um but I don't have all I don't have all the answers. I think
Well,
there's still like, there's still going to be a gap here, but I'm hopeful that better information and more awareness will help. And I think I think women have to sort of trust that if something is different for you, believe that. um if you're on some kind of birth control, or you don't have a cycle anymore, it's difficult to track, and I realize that. But if you can, I think seeing that the changing cycle lengths and things is very empowering. And I'd say, as much as you can, share it with other people. I think, we are uniquely predisposed to think like, oh, maybe I feel like this, particularly with the mood things. And I hope to, spend some more time on research in that area, because I think it's really easy to say, oh, it must be me. It must be my relationship. It must be the choice I'm making to continue working, or the choice I've made not to continue working, or I'm not giving, just kind of the negative self-talk that makes you think it must be something that you've done when yes, our lives, there's definitely things in our lives that add stress, but I think there is also some biology, physiology that is contributing too. And I'd just like to give proper credence to that. So that we're aware of it. I think that's helpful.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it's important just to circle back that we still hear we still hear that you're too young, you're too young, you're too young.
Yeah.
And it's little wonder why women also think they're too young, right? They think like, oh, this doesn't happen until 50. And the message is getting out there that this is a long process. It's not a light switch, and it can take literally years and years, to occur. And you can start feeling the effects of this much earlier than anybody has been talking about, which is really what, in my mind, this research you've done elucidates.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I'm trying to figure out is, and I don't know how quite to make it happen though, but I'd love to build in. Again, I debate whether or not to try to build something into healthcare or can you do it on the side. But I feel like if there was a way for every woman at 38, somewhere before 40, honestly, to get this information, to get this anticipatory guidance about perimenopause, I think it would be a game changer because it's also when all of these sort of, chronic diseases and things happen. And so if we made changes and were aware that this new phase was starting, I think there would be so many upside benefits. And it's hard to know how to make that happen. I mean, to ask, and I think this really should live with primary care, to be honest. But most of us don't. There's really no need to see primary care at that. A lot of us don't have kind of annual visits. Then, I mean, I think it's puberty, the puberty talk and the pregnancy talk. I mean, I guess that sort of happens inside healthcare, but happen outside of healthcare. I mean, this is a normal life transition, and so again, just the more we can all do to talk about it and normalize it and share our experiences with our family and friends. I think this is one of the things we're missing by family units getting more dispersed geographically. People aren't it's not stuff you share. We're taught that this isn't public discussion, and I think it just has to be.
Yeah, I agree. And it, you know, your sites like yours, which I wanted to say, I really do think, you were talking like it might be a little too science heavy in some people's eyes, but I think the information is very clear and concise. I think
Great.
it's
Thank you.
yeah, I
Thank
do think it's very accessible. And you know, and and I'm curious your take on this. A lot of women will maybe start experiencing some of this, and they want to get their hormones tested, which we heard again and again, right at the meeting, that it's just not doesn't say that much in the story, because of how variable it is from within yourself and from woman to woman. And it really is very valuable to know your cycle and your symptoms, your bef beyond getting your hormones tested.
Yeah. I mean, that question comes up so much, and I totally get it. I mean, I wanted to get when you feel sort of out of control and you're faced with some new chaos, you want to say, like, where am I? What is it? And I will tell you, I have checked hormone levels at various times, like through a blood thing I did. And really, I haven't learned anything from any of it because, and I'm actually now doing something where I'm looking like over a long period of time. I'm using a fertility app actually.
That's
Uh,
interesting.
and the new product that was just released, it would tell me I was in a phase, the one of the FSH, I don't want to, call anyone
Mhm.
out here, but it would not work for me because my FSH is all over the place. Right. And I'm doing, first morning urine. Um, Again, I'm not trying to get pregnant. I think it would be near impossible at this point. And I don't even really know what the quality of this device is. But I shared it with a couple of my advisors at the meeting, and they said these look really reasonable. It is all of my hormones are all over the place, and for me, that's why I feel like this. It's just so validating, right? But to your point about like certainly not a one point in time measurement. Um, And if I weren't, these strips that I'm using that I'm paying for, maybe I should one day I should do it like 4 times during the day, because I suspect it will be just it's I get and that was one of the things early in this project that my fantastic scientific advisors just kept saying, Nina, these hormones are pulsatile. It's not going to tell you anything. And I really wanted answers. I really wanted answers. And I honestly think some providers are willing to just do the testing, because and I feel mixed about it, because depending, it's whether, I don't really understand how all the billing works, but it's not going to get useful information. That's, I think, the true bottom line. And yet I completely understand the desire for what the is going on here. I need some answers. So the ranges are so big, even in serum, that we really each need to be our own baseline. And I think the true holy grail will be, I think the younger generations are really good. They're tracking my daughter, like her periods from starting when she first got it. That's amazing data. And maybe one day, and there are some people working on it, we will be able to track daily, so that Nina, will know what's my kind of cycle look like I will never know what my cycle in my mid reproductive years look like, too late. But if you could, you might be able to say, oh, look how different it is now. I'm in I like, my body has started to make this transition. That would be fantastic. And I suspect it's not that, I don't know how far away that is. So that type of measurement over long hauls may be interesting and useful. But in general, it's like, our goal is to get rid of symptoms. And so treating to the symptoms with the toolbox is really, really the key. That's a tough one, right? That is, I feel like I answer that question all the time. I just had a call with a friend of a friend. I didn't know this, and she said, "Can you just help me find a provider that'll check my levels and give?" And I was like, "No, that I can. let's unravel this a little before we go further." So, but I understand it for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I feel like this has been really illuminating, and I'm excited to share this with the audience, because I think there's a lot of people who they're going to be like, yes, it's about time somebody started talking about how early this can start and what that means. Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you would like to leave our audience with?
Um, I would just go back to the um kind of the believe yourself. If you're noticing changes, trust that in yourself, and document what you can. Um, and just sort of the separation of this from a medicalized, a medical, taking it out of the medical world, or needing a healthcare provider to validate, that's what it is. By all means, if there is a symptom or something that is getting in the way of your, interfering in your daily life and relationships, seek healthcare for sure. But I'm hopeful that, either through the Women Living Better site, or what the Menopause Society is putting out, there are good sources of information out there. And I'm really hopeful that the kind of normalization of it will help a lot of people.
Excellent. Do you have anything in the works right now that we should know about?
Um, what am I working on right now? I'm trying to get a maybe another study um going around, delving in more on the mood stuff. Because I think we still could drill down more on the experiences. I think there are some, I just, again, this has not been researched yet, but like, my gut tells me more women develop phobias and fears, and there's something, to me, there's a corollary in the our stress tolerance or arousal response, again, arousal in the mood function,
Hmm.
similar to what happens to our thermal neutral zone with temperature. I think there's something that the fluctuating hormones act upon. It's also in the brain, that makes us, as I said, like, less tolerant to stressors. And so I would love to, again, I do the kind of, not necessarily quick and dirty, but the research that then boils it up. And so our friends that have NIH grants can then take something and go further. So that is one thing that I hope to get started. And really right now, just these more recent papers, we're just trying to get it out there and get it up on the site. And let's see, I've done, I think brain fog is live, but I'm also redoing the symptom pages, just making sure they're all up to kind of the latest research. And again, changing them so that you can kind of get the high level at the top of the page. And then for those that want a little more detail and get to the studies, you get it as the page goes down. So I am doing that to reorganization. So it sounds like some of that is working on the site. I've been working on it slowly for a while. So those are the things that are kind of on my plate right now.
Well, thank you for the work that you're doing. I will put links to this in my show notes so the audience can easily find it. And I look forward to what you find in the future.
Yeah, well, great. I'm glad we're connected and look forward to staying in touch.
Well, that's our show. Come on back next week when I sit down with Dr. Jody Duche for an in-depth conversation about all the weight loss drugs we've been hearing about and are now being marketed towards menopausal women. She's one of the original researchers on these drugs and an Ironman athlete to boot. So this is a good one. Come on back for that. And until then, as always, stay feisty. You've been listening to Hit Play, Not Pause, a feisty menopause podcast for active, performance-minded women. I'm your host, Celine Yeager. The show is edited and produced by the strong, talented, and amazing women at Live Feisty Media. Follow us on social media at Feisty Menopause, and please help us spread the word. Screenshot and share this episode on your social media channels with the tag @FeistyMenopause. Share the show with your friends, and please subscribe, like, review, and rate this show wherever you get your podcasts. Word of mouth and good reviews make it easier for other listeners to find. Thanks for listening, and as always, stay feisty.